Hey everyone, it's Carissa at Sprinkled with Glitter. Thanks for stopping by today. First of all, I have to apologize for my unpolished fingernails. No polish, I'm appalled, but I was going to get a manicure later that day and I needed to film this video so you get the nurse hands. So today, Honeybee Stamps is having a blog hop to celebrate their August release, and check out this stamp. This is called the Zen Bouquet stamp set. And that stamp set is inspired by the adult coloring book trend. It's so awesome. So many things you can do with it. I'm also showing you the Wonderful Word die and also the Sentiment Builder stamp set. This has a lot of great little words that you can put together to make sentiments, and I'll be using that in these projects today, along with that Lotus stamp set. I won't be using that today, but that's a part of the new release as well. So they have some embellishments. You saw like kind of a gold sequin mix there. And they have these clear droplets as well, but these are not just circular. They have kind of a teardrop shape and kind of a diamond shape too, along with these little gems. And I will be using those little gems on my project. Or gems, not gems. Okay, so moving on, let's get started with the project. I am starting with this ginormous stamp. It's like pancake size. It's so big. And because it's so big, I want to make sure I get a good impression. And so I'm going to be using my regular size Misty for this. And I've pushed my paper into the corner. Now I'm going to flip this around so I can do it right-handed. Someone once told me that I use my Misty left-handed, so I'm trying to work on using it right-handed. But to me, I think you can use it either way, and that's part of the genius of the Misty, right? So I am inking up this stamp with some Versamark ink, and I'm stamping it onto some Neenah Solar White cardstock. I'm going to do a few of these because I am experimenting today. And during this experimentation, I actually discovered something really super cool, and I'm going to share that with you today. So I prepped the surface of each of these pieces of Neenah Solar White cardstock with some EK Success powder tool. I am stamping that Zen Bouquet on each of them. I also included a piece of vellum here. And once I get all of those stamped, I am going to coat them in some super fine detail clear embossing powder. This is the Ranger version of that. And I am going to be careful to knock off all of the excess, and then I'm going to take them over to my heat tool and heat set those. So when I first started planning this project, my idea was kind of to do a modified iron-off embossing technique. And if you don't know what I'm talking about by iron-off embossing, it's where you emboss something and then you can kind of ink blend or something over it, do whatever, spray, mist, whatever. And then you put a piece of paper down on top of the embossing and then an iron, and you iron off the embossing powder that was on there, and it creates a smooth finish where that embossing powder was. So you no longer have the shiny raised finish. So that's what I was kind of going for today, and in the process of that, I kind of discovered something really cool. Now, before I do that, I am using my Copic airbrush system to add some color on these panels of Neenah Solar White cardstock as well as the vellum. And I'm going to show you a lot of different versions today so you can kind of get a feel of how this technique works. Now, for this rainbow scheme, I am only using 3 marker colors. I am using R29, Y08, and BG13. And by blending all of those together, I can get the full spectrum of the rainbow. Now, I did want to mention that a couple weeks ago, I shared a project using the Copic airbrush system, and I had run out of compressed air can. And so I splurged and I did it. I jumped in with both feet and I bought an air compressor. So I will never run out of air for my Copic airbrush system again. So as I said, I wanted to try a modified iron-off embossing technique. Once I got the color laid down, I am putting that scratch piece of paper over the top of the embossing, and I put it into my Mink carrier sheet and I ran it through the Mink. Now, I'm using the Mink to create my heat like you would with an iron, and I totally did not expect this, but look at that transfer. Now, the problem I did here, this was my first run, I allowed that to cool off with that scratch paper on it, and that was my big mistake. But I'm going to show you how to kind of do that real quick. But I was not expecting the beauty of that transferred image onto that scratch piece of paper. So instead of using a scratch piece of paper this time, I'm going to use another piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I'm going to put them face to face. And I'm also cutting down my mink carrier sheet just so that it's just as big as my card fronts here, because I want to get this out of the mink as soon as possible. And if there's extra on that end, it's going to take a little bit longer to kind of spit it out. So I'm using my mink on a 5 setting. I ran that through, and before it had a chance to cool off, I went ahead and separated these two pieces, and boom, it is gorgeous. Now I'm going to tell you something about this. If you were to use a dye-based ink and try this technique, you are not going to get the color transfer because the color is not going to dry on top of the embossing powder. Because I use the Copic markers, the color dried on top of that embossing powder and it didn't wipe away. Normally the color would wipe away because it's dye-based and it would be kind of like an emboss resist technique. In this case, the embossing doesn't resist the ink because it's alcohol-based. Now, when I tried this on the vellum, it didn't work so good. The transferred area was not crisp. It was not clear. It was kind of not a good result, but the vellum piece itself was still usable, and I'm going to use that in a card project. So here I'm just experimenting a little bit more. And what I did in this instance was I went back and I embossed the image once again, but this time I used a super fine detail white embossing powder. Now check out when I pop these apart, and I'm doing it rather quickly so that they don't dry together. But with that white embossing powder, you get a little bit more muted colors on that transferred image. So you can pick what you like. I tend to like my white embossing powder better than I like my clear embossing powder. So I was also getting kind of a haze of mist around that transferred image. So keep that in mind. Some of that Copic marker will transfer to that white, Neenah Solar White, when you transfer it over, but I'm going to show you what I did to kind of remedy that. So for this piece of vellum, I actually went ahead and airbrushed the back side of it because I didn't get a great result when transferring that with the first piece of vellum. I went ahead and just embossed it on the front side using superfine detail white embossing powder. And then I used my Copic airbrush system to add some color to the back side of that. And I used the RV09, Y17, and YR14 to get that really pretty kind of magenta-y sunset look. I love the way the colors turned out. So once I had all of my card fronts done, I went ahead and cut out that wonderful word die cut using some Licorice Twist cardstock. This is from Basil. And I went ahead and backed it with some black craft foam and a layer of stick-it adhesive as well, so that when I cut these out, it had not only dimension, but adhesive on the back of that. So I added the stick-it adhesive between the two layers, between the cardstock and the foam, and then also to the back side of the foam so that they would just stick when I was done with them. Now, I used the Sentiment Builder stamp set to stamp some words. It says, "You're amazing, fabulous, incredible," and then the word wonderful is going to be beneath it. And I heat embossed that on some Essentials by Ellen 43-pound vellum, my favorite vellum. Now, I don't know if you can see in this video here, but I kind of have a haze of color around this transferred image. Remember, this is the transferred image, so the white part is not super white. I mean, it has some transfer from the Copic marker. So I don't know if maybe if I used less heat, if that would make a difference. I'm not real sure, but I loved this transferred image so much. I was bound and determined to find a way to use it. So what I did was I just went ahead and fussy cut around the edge, and now I am going to make a little hinge for this. So I have a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock here. I scored it at 1/2 inch and then I cut it at 1 inch, and I'm going to fold this on that score line and kind of create a little hinge that I can attach to this fussy cut piece and make this my card front. So because I want it to stick really well, I'm using some Be Creative tape. This is, I believe, the 1/4 inch, and I'm just putting it on both sides of that little hinged piece. And I am going to attach that hinged piece to my fussy cut piece. Then I'll just use my bone folder to press that on there really well, and then I'll remove the backer from that second piece, and I'm going to attach it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of 110-pound Neenah Solar White cardstock, and this is going to be my card front. Now, I have to say, if the little hinge on the inside bothers you, you could cover it up with a second piece of cardstock, but quite honestly, it didn't bother me so much, so I just left it as it is. But I thought this was a really cool, fun way to use that transferred image that I created earlier, and I just love the way it turned out. And it was something a little different rather than just, you know, putting that onto a card front and calling it done. So that fussy cut image makes it really fun. Now you can see I'm going to finish off all the cards the same way. I'm going to start by applying that wonderful die cut that already has the dimension and the adhesive on the back. And then I'm going to slide in that vellum strip that I created with those additional words on it. And I'm going to use that adhesive on the back of that wonderful die cut where it overlaps to kind of help hold that vellum strip in place. And then I'll also hide a little bit of the multi-medium and the matte finish behind some of that embossing on that strip as well to keep that nice and secure. Now I added some of those fun new gems from Honeybee, and I used some multi-medium matte finish to add those onto the card, and then I finished off that wonderful die cut with a layer of glossy accents. And you can see this is super fun. The results are not like super crisp and clear, but I love the transferred color of that image. And remember, it is going to create a mirrored image, so keep that in mind. But I just love the way that card turned out. So now I have my vellum piece here, and all I'm going to do with this is attach it to a Neenah Solar White top folding card base. So it's cut to 4 1/4 by 11 and scored at 5 1/2. Now vellum can be tricky to adhere, but the stick-it adhesive is actually really wonderful for adhering vellum. I like it a lot. You can see it sometimes a teensy bit, but I promise you, for the most part, it's pretty much invisible behind the vellum. So I added a little strip of the stick-it adhesive along the top of that card base. I attached my vellum right over top of it, so it's kind of loose leaf on the top of that card front. And then, of course, I have that wonderful die cut there along with the sentiment strip and some of the gems on this card front as well. And you can see that vellum with that embossed image on the front is beautiful. I also ran a line of stitching over that wonderful die cut there just for a little bit of interest. Now that was the actual embossed piece. Here was the original piece where I tried to transfer that image onto a piece of Neenah Solar White. Didn't work out so well. The iron off, or quote unquote iron off embossing, those lines didn't leave kind of like a super smooth result, but I thought it was pretty enough to go ahead and use for a card. So what I decided to do for this one is make this piece of vellum my card front. So once again, I'm creating a hinge. Had I thought about this ahead of time, I could have maybe planned a little bit differently. I scored the side of that vellum at 1/2 inch, and now I have 2 pieces of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I've cut those down just about 1/2 inch. And I've put adhesive all over one of those pieces of Neenah Solar White cardstock, and I attached just the flap of that vellum to that adhesive. And what I'm going to do is sandwich that flap between these 2 pieces of Neenah Solar White cardstock, and that's going to make it where my vellum piece is my card front. Like I said, had I thought about this in advance, I probably could have made that vellum piece a little bit larger and I wouldn't have had to make my card skinnier. But in the end, I think this turned out beautiful anyway. And even though the iron off technique didn't leave for the crispest of images, it did kind of, where that clear embossing powder melted, it kind of left like this really cool sheen. So there is a look at that final card that I put together for you today. Of course, I used the original piece as well, the one that I airbrushed, and you'll see a picture of that here in these photos coming up. But I had a great time kind of playing with this modified iron-off embossing technique. Now, like I said before, if you were to use a dye-based ink to do this, you're not going to get the color transfer onto your piece of Nina Solar white cardstock. But because I used an alcohol base, that ink dried on top of the embossing powder and allowed me to transfer both the embossing powder and the color to my second piece of cardstock. Now, I also wanted to mention that you can achieve this look with an iron as well. However, I was lazy and I didn't want to get out my iron, so that's why I used my Mink in this case, but you can try it with an iron as well. As always, I will have links to all the products used in this project over at my blog at sprinkledwithglitter.com. You can see more still shots and find more information, as well as information on a giveaway over there. And I will link the featured supplies in the description at YouTube. Thanks for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed this project. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.